Hello, everyone. Welcome back to JSM Impact Conversations. And today I am thrilled to be joined by a wonderful person, a person that I'm really honored to call my friend, also my mentor, Professor Jo Meehan. Jo, welcome.
Thank you, Hakan. It's lovely to be here.
I am so excited. We have so much to cover and we have so much to talk, but also leave all the information and all the descriptions and all the links to the description box below. So please check amazing work that Joe has been doing for many, many years now. So Joe is a professor of responsible procurement, and also she's at the moment the director of Center for Sustainable Business at University of Liverpool. And one of the things that I really want to uncover today is a concept that Joe has developed over the years, which is called business not as usual. And we will discuss what it means and what are the implications for supply chain researchers. But first things first, I always love putting things in a context. And why are we having this conversation? Because as we know, every single day we have a new problem that we are facing, and the socio-ecological problems, political turmoil, they are actually quite challenging. So we need solutions, and those solutions must come like really, really fast. But unfortunately, we are aware that sustainability has been reduced to an accounting tool. And also, we know that we are focusing on efficiency and competitiveness rather than seeing supply chains as social ecological systems. But also, decision making is not inclusive, and we don't really represent all the voices in decision making. One of the papers that I love a lot, which is coming from your wonderful body of work, Joe, is actually looking at business leaders with like blind spots and perhaps ignorance. And in one of the papers that you are really explaining us what paradoxical sense making means, you actually explain that business leaders tend to distance themselves from the problems, and then they use the language around othering. So I and you, we and they, and this is maybe one of the biggest problems that we need to face. So this brings me to my first question. So challenge all of these problems and constructs. Joe, you have been working a lot, and for the last few years, you are really challenging the industry, business leaders, and also policymakers. And this concept of business not as usual is groundbreaking. But what does it mean? What is it? And what do you do in that space?
So it's some work I've been doing with Professor Louise Knight, who is at the moment at Twente University in the Netherlands. And we were doing some work on futures. So what's the future of our field? So procurement and supply management we were looking at specifically. And, we all know the term business as usual, it's the day-to-day stuff, the way we do things. And what we were increasingly seeing is to really think about a sustainable future. And sustainable, we include environment, nature, biodiversity, and human rights, all encompassed in that. To get to this new sustainable future, we can't forget how we got here in the first place. So, what led us to these multiple crises? And it's often the way we do business and why we do business and how we do business it is tied up in that. So we started to think about, well, what was business not as usual look like? Because we can, as you talked about efficiency, we become more efficient, we can get rid of some of our waste, but it's all built on this same logic. And it's these logics that are flawed because they don't serve people and they don't serve the planet well. So we wanted to say, sustainable for who, and sustainable by which notions of success, and who who should have this sustainable futures, and futures are plural, they haven't yet happened. So that's where this term business as usual, not as usual, came from. And what we were trying to say in this business not as usual is we need to really get down to some of the deep rooted things that we take for granted and really start to challenge and question them. And it's not to say that everything's wrong, but it's more about bringing up our awareness and bringing to the fore our attention on some of these things. So things like, why do we do business? And I think my field's procurement as well as supply chain. But from a procurement point of view, it's why do we buy things? Um, and that sounds like a really obvious question. Well, we need stuff. Well, we may need access to things. We don't need everything manufactured from new. So it starts to build these more critical engagements of some of the foundational things that we just take for granted. So why do we do business? What's the purpose of it? And it has to be more than just to make money or to keep us in jobs. Well, what's the point of that? Who do we do it for? Who do we harm? And who do we do business with? It's interesting you talked about business leaders. They all, the businesses aren't there to do bad in the world. Businesses all want to do good in the world. Nobody goes to work and goes, you know what, I'm going to go and really harm some people today. That's not how the world works. We all think we're doing good things, but there are unintended consequences. The problem is the way we structure our supply chains. We don't see that harm, so we expect other people to do harmful things on our behalf, so we can take some of that value out. But we do have this real distance between the decisions that we make and the harms that happen through our supply chain activities. And we can start to really tap into people's motives about, why do we do business? What is it for? And how do we do business? And business leaders all say, we want to work with good companies doing good things in the world. But when we look at what we buy, we don't actually buy that way now. And we can't expect all this good stuff to happen if we don't. So we have to buy the future today that we want for tomorrow.
Absolutely, the great points and really inspirational. Thank you, Joe, for sharing your vision. And you're actually spot on. We just keep creating incremental solutions. Also, from my context, which is the fashion industry, we keep creating a market-based technocentric solutions. Actually, we don't challenge the underlying business conditions and why we need solutions in the first place. Also, you say something really important, purpose. Because when we talk about supply chains, and I think this is really important for supply chain researchers to explore further, purpose is actually quite different and quite context specific. When you work with multiple supply chain actors and your stakeholders have different perceptions, have different values, and have different principles. So actually, you say something so interesting, and everyone has good intentions. Maybe hearts are in the right place, but the execution is not inclusive or plural. And then we create intergenerational consequences for the supply chain people whose voices must be acknowledged in the first place.
Yeah, I think for me, it's that we don't see the harms that we create. We don't experience those harms. They're not in our communities that we engage with, so we can convince ourselves and placate ourselves that what we're doing is good. And I think we tend to say, well, most businesses are doing some good things, and go, well, look at all the good things we've done, but that's not netted off. That's some good stuff that's happened over here. That doesn't negate the harms that we may do to somebody else or to something else elsewhere in our supply chain. And
Yeah.
I'm a big football fan, and it's Everton all the way. But it's essentially the way I explain it to students is the way we report what businesses do. We only report the goals we've scored, not the goals we've conceded. So, if we say, here's all the good stuff that we've done, here's our sustainability report, we can't honestly hold that up and say that's a true account of what we've done as an organisation if we don't take account of harms that are done in our name through our supply chain. And what we hear from supply chain leaders is, well, supply chains are far too complex, they're too big, we couldn't possibly know what's happening in those supply chains. And yes, they are very big and complex, but why are they big and complex? They're big and complex because we've made decisions to make them big and complex, to essentially push these harms somewhere else, or to get these efficiencies, or to ensure we get more value appropriation for us. So there's a
Yeah.
different way to distribute value if we center social, if we center the environment, if we center sustainable futures, rather than centering the business case. So if we had to make a socio-economic case or a socio-environmental case for business rather than a
Mhm.
business case for doing sustainability, things would look very different.
Absolutely. And I think also this is one of the central problems, justifying inaction with excuses that sound so reasonable to so many people, such as supply chain complexity. Like you, when I also speak with many people, students or business people, I say actually supply chains are man-made. We have made them.
Exactly.
So now
Exactly.
it is our task to
And
actually
female and
remake them.
female made.
Absolutely, absolutely. But also one of the things that is really interesting, Joe, is this mismatch between theory and practice. If we look at the supply chain management research for the last 20, 25 years, we actually explain the experiences of harm that other individuals face. So even though, yes, business leaders don't experience them firsthand, we have evidence demonstrating the action that they take and implications and consequences of those actions. But then this shows us one thing: we are doing something a little bit wrong in academia.
Yeah. And I
Engage
think,
with the business leaders.
yeah, I think part of that is, so my own research, as you know, is around mostly around modern slavery in supply chains at the moment. And when we look at what businesses are doing around modern slavery in their supply chains, it's dealt with contractually. So organisations will put it in their procurement contracts that our suppliers, must have a policy on modern slavery or must do something or report on slavery. They put it in their contracts and it goes all the way back down to the supply chain. And yes, that's important that we raise those issues, but it's when you look at practice, it's never really in our contract management procedures. We never really discuss it beyond that initial have you got a policy on it? And it's then forgotten. It becomes a legal problem, a contractual problem. And I think one of the dangers is putting it in contracts in that way. Not that that's something that shouldn't happen, but the danger is if it's only there, we think things like modern slavery or forced labour or vulnerable work is a contractual issue, and it isn't. It's a social issue.
Mm.
And how we research that then becomes really important. How are we as researchers potentially reinforcing that this is a contractual, it's a supply chain issue? And one of the pieces of work that we're working on at the moment is around how organisations view harms in their supply chains. And we use this analogy of windows and mirrors. So the idea is that when we ask people, how do you think about modern slavery in your supply chain? The language that they use tends towards, well, if it happens at all, so they're a bit defensive in the first place, but if it does happen and we accept it happens in our supply chains or in our sector, it happens out there somewhere else. And you mentioned about this othering that was in our JPSM paper. This othering, it's a bad actor somewhere in our supply chain. And they're looking out the window and observing it may be out there. But we start to create this distance. It's not us, it's them. And that's really dangerous language when we start othering people. And what they're not doing is holding the mirror up. So instead of looking out the window, they're not holding the mirror up to saying, how are we creating conditions of harm that then play out into our supply chain? Because we have to look at ourselves. So even though we may not have forced labour in our operations and we treat our staff well,
Yeah.
if we're really pushing on price and efficiency and asking for more reporting and blah, 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 blah. Oh, and we want innovation as well. Oh, and we want a really good price. And we want you to do this, that, and the other. That's creating vulnerabilities and pressure back through our supply chains. And we're creating conditions of risk. So I think for us as researchers, there's something about how we research, who we ask. So I know we've done this ourselves. You tend to research the big focal organisations in your supply chain. Now, they're not the ones who are experiencing harm. They may be creating a system of harm, but they're not the ones who are experiencing it. So we need to perhaps get better at creating opportunities for different voices to be heard. How do we get that worker voice, or how do we get the voice of non-humans? How do we get the voice of nature into our research? Who's the advocate for some of the other systems that we are harming through our supply chains? So there's something about
Absolutely.
who we research. So another aspect of my research is around power. We tend to ask the very powerful what they think. Then it's another way for that narrative to be controlled by the very powerful. So I think we have a responsibility there to just be conscious of that potential bias of who we're asking. So I know when we started our modern slavery research, myself and Bruce Pennington from Liverpool, who we've been working with, we started by looking at modern slavery statements. So what was published, what was disclosed, and you start to get to, well, this is what they're telling us they're doing. This isn't necessarily what they're doing. So then we said, well, let's go and interview managers. Let's go and work in organizations and see what they're doing, see what they're actually doing. And we need to go that step further now. Well, what's the next few links in that chain? What do they think is happening? What do the workers who are experiencing harm feel about some of these issues? So there's issues there, and there's lots of issues that come up for researchers that we have to navigate with care, because we are management researchers. We research supply chains, we research businesses in the main, and there are some exceptions. Yourself and Donna are good exceptions, who do look at worker voice and look at other voices in those supply chains. But the rest of us could do some harm further. We go stomping in, asking these interviews. That itself can be harmful.
Absolutely.
So we need to be really careful around how we approach some of these issues.
And we have to be really inclusive and also respectful and plural in the way we also design our research model, our research questions and everything. Because when we are in the field, my observation is actually the truth is context specific and really person specific. So what companies claim what they are doing has a different meaning for the people that are affected by those choices. And I think supply chain and operations management is a wonderful discipline to actually understand how to move from transactional relations toward people-centered relations. So everything that you explained wonderfully inspire all of us to actually go and do things differently,
And
inclusively,
there's something
innovatively.
there about, we talked about the purpose of organisations. I think there's a lesson for us as researchers. Who are we doing research for?
Yeah.
Are we just doing it for other researchers? Well, partly, but there's some of us who want to do more than that. And again, it's us reflecting on what do we do
Mhm.
with these things. So if we are asking people who've been, not getting a fair deal through our supply chains, for example, and we go and interview them, we get all this data. What do we do with that? And is there an obligation on us to do more, and not just put it on LinkedIn, which I know is important, but there are other ways to
Yeah.
engage a broader conversation around responsibilities and what we collectively might do. So now one of the things that we were doing with our supply chain research, and that framing study that Bruce and I did around sense making, we then extended that into another piece of work where we were looking at images. So we used what was called photo elicitation method, where we were asking people to take photographs of moments when they were prompted to think about forced labour. It was not taking pictures of victims or anything like that, but what were those instances where it came into their consciousness? And it might have been a photograph of a stack of contracts, for example, and like, oh, that reminds me, I need to think about modern slavery. So we were trying to capture when it came into our consciousness, and then from that we've developed some framing approaches. How we might frame modern slavery or different forms of vulnerability. And we did an exhibition in the International Slavery Museum in Liverpool. So we took those photographs and we put some text by it and some narrative. And it was just a different way to engage a different group of people. And I think there's some real opportunities. I think some of the supply chain work that goes on is absolutely fascinating. The way the world works is largely through supply chains, and it's amazing how many people don't understand how supply chains work. Um,
Absolutely.
and again, when you speak to students who aren't business students, they come from different disciplines. They're always fascinated when you tell them how supply chains work. They go, God, I didn't realize that's where my clothes came from, or gosh, I didn't realize these different impacts that supply chain has on the world. And with that comes a great responsibility as well, but a good
Absolutely.
opportunity for us to really show what responsible supply chains can look like.
And also using our platforms to give agency to the workers, to the supply chain people, to farmers, those that don't have a voice, or I wouldn't say they don't have a voice, but they are silenced by the system.
Yeah,
So
they have a voice, they're
to,
just not
to
listened to.
to bring them to a spotlight where they can actually really make their concerns visible. And I think as researchers, this is a great opportunity and responsibility for us to be more creative and innovative in the way we disseminate impact and our knowledge. Joe, thank you so much for your time.
My
It,
pleasure.
it, it has been wonderful having you, and I will just put all the links in the description. So please check Joe's wonderful work. And I will see you all in the next episode at GSM Impact Conversations. So see you around. Joe, thank you so much for your time. See you later.
Thank you very much. Bye.
Bye, everyone.